Hi, I'm Chloe. I'm a recent graduate from the University of Glasgow. I'm a former president and also captain of the Women's Rugby Club, and I'm joined today by Dr. Willie Stewart, and we're discussing concussions, brain health within sport.
Hi Chloe, how are you getting on?
Good, thank you. How are you?
Good, busy, which is always a good way to be.
So, I wanted to talk about concussions, my own personal experience with concussions today. I've been a rugby player for 4 years and have played with people who are professional in the Premiership and Scotland level, as well as everyone who's starting out rugby for the first time. So, had a lot of experience with people having concussions, maybe for their first time in their careers, or maybe they've had quite a few, and just wanted to get some opinions and advice from yourself.
Sure. I mean, the first thing I'll say is rugby is a fantastic sport, isn't it? There's so much you get from playing in rugby, from the physical side of it, from the just enjoyment of getting out and playing with mates and that camaraderie. But there is a risk, and the risk is that there can be injury. And in particular, one of the risks that particularly is there with rugby is of head injuries and concussions. And so it's not uncommon. I mean, I played rugby for 13, 14 years and got several concussions over that period of time. You've been playing it for a few years and you've been concussed. Tell us more about your concussion. Is it one concussion you've had?
Um, so I think when I was younger, probably like 18, 19, and I was starting out at uni, I was very keen. I wanted to get involved in sport and I wanted to just play as much as I could.
Yeah,
And I probably didn't look after myself in the way that I should have now
yeah.
looking back. So I definitely had kind of a number of mild concussions over those first few years and probably didn't follow the protocols as strictly as I should have.
Yeah.
But the concussion that's kind of more of a concern to me now is one that I had in February this year. That was more severe, and I had more severe symptoms. And I'm still not playing rugby now
Really?
in October
Really?
because of that. Yeah.
I mean, there's a couple of, can I unpick this with you slightly? So there's a couple of things there. First of all, you've had a 4 year career in rugby, but already you're experiencing the problems of repeated injuries, repeated concussions. That as you have more injuries, then the symptoms can become more troublesome and long lasting. And it may be that what you're experiencing now was because you didn't look after yourself in those earlier games. We don't know for sure, but that's certainly something we see. And so the message really for everybody at all levels is if you have any suspicion that you might have had a bang in the head that's causing symptoms, take yourself off the pitch. If in doubt, sit them out is the message. And that goes for you personally feeling the symptoms, but also your teammates if they see you not following the game the way you would normally do. Or if it's the coaches or if it's the referees, if they think you've had a bang in the head, you need to come off the park straight away. And the important thing in that is it gives you the best chance of good recovery and best rapid recovery and protects you from any long-term problems. So like everybody who plays in sport, whoever wants to enjoy participating in sport, you don't want to take yourself off the park. And that's what you did the first few times. And that was the wrong thing to do, as you know. But it's a really hard thing not to do because you feel you want to stay on the park. But now, a couple of years later, it could have been sooner, but a couple of years later, you're probably suffering because you didn't take that early opportunity to get off the park. And how many months from that last injury?
About 6, 7 months.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a long time to recover. Normally, we'd expect people to be. Most people are back ready to play about 3 weeks after. And actually, the guidance now is that if you're concussed or you suspect you've got concussion, then you're really out for 3 weeks. That's the minimum. But most people by 3 weeks are ready to get back and play again. We say that if by 28 days, so 4 weeks, you're still getting significant symptoms, you really need to go and see a doctor and get seen about it. When we're talking about 6 months, that's quite a time to be still working your way back into sport. It's not unusual. The more we look after people, the more we ask questions, the more we find it does take longer than that 28 days for quite a number of folk. 30 to even 50% of people were still getting some symptoms 6 months down the line.
Yeah. I think a big one for me, what you said before, is that rugby was such a big part of my
Yeah,
life
yeah,
and I enjoy it so much. And it's a big love for me. And it's been very difficult losing that and losing kind of that sense of team and community and finding a way back to that. I'm hopeful for, but just wanting to take my time because I don't want to push it when I'm not ready, and then end up having a bad relationship with the sport forever, when it is something that I love and do advocate for everyone to get involved in if they can.
I mean, people who, if you get a concussion through sport managed properly, there's every expectation you'd get back to play again, and you'd enjoy it just as much. The problem is where it's not managed properly, where maybe you've not recognised the symptoms, or tried to hide the symptoms, or somebody has not looked after your rehabilitation properly. That more rapid recovery, we know, increases the risk of injuries down the line. So it needn't be another it can be another concussion, but actually, knee injuries, musculoskeletal injuries, there's a higher risk after a concussion for about a year or so afterwards. But there are the risks of further head injuries, and the recovery time for those head injuries can take longer. And one of the best ways we've got of trying to encourage players to look after themselves is for people like yourself speaking out and saying, look, here's what I did, several years ago, because it seemed like the best thing to do because I wanted to keep playing. But actually, maybe I shouldn't have. Maybe I should have done things differently. And if you think, the 6 months you've added up trying to get back to play, if in those earlier knocks in the head you'd taken 3 weeks out each time, you'd still be, within a week or two, getting involved in some training. You'd still be around the club. You'd still be participating in the matches. You'd still be part of the game. But you'd have been back 3 weeks ready to go again, and you may not have had to take 6 months out. We don't know for sure, but following best practices, that's the kind of thing we would be worried about.
Yeah, definitely. And I think as I became captain and then president of the club, and was in that leadership position, that a lot of young players were looking up to me, kind of following my example, what I did. I knew concussions was going to be a very important part of my time as leadership after having those years when I was younger, and not looking after myself as much as I should have. I didn't want anyone to kind of follow my steps. So it was one thing we did was make sure everyone did the kind of rugby course that Scottish Rugby do online, and the concussion education, because a big part of concussion is obviously kind of self-diagnosing and being self-aware of your symptoms. And often in grassroots levels, definitely, you don't have, your people who are able to look after you in a medical sense. Sometimes we couldn't have physios at games because we didn't have the funds for it. So we wanted to make sure everyone was aware and could, support each other. But definitely not wanting people to follow my lead.
No, it's really important, and we've worked really closely. Scottish sport across the board has been fantastic over the years that have been working on all of this, and as a team, whether it's us at university or clinical colleagues or our friends in sport, we've all tried to work together to try and find the best ways to get this message through, and it's working, I think, at elite and professional level. And probably uniquely around the world, it's working really well at grassroots, but it still needs a bit of effort put in there. But what we're seeing, the rewards in professional level, are that you look at professional rugby, look at professional football. We see players put their hand up now and saying, "I don't feel great. I think I've had a bang in the head." We see their teammates, spotting they're out of line, spotting that they've lost the line out calls or they're behind in the play. And calling the doctors across and saying, could you maybe have a closer look at Chloe for me, would you? And we see, even we see the referees stepping in and saying that player must go off. 10 years ago that would never have happened, but now we're seeing it. I think we need to get the same messages through to the grassroots sports, to the non-professional sports. Even at university, which is a high level of rugby in many ways, we still need to get that message through. And stress the importance that, look, there's no reason why you can't have all the great fun and great benefits of playing rugby. You just need to watch yourself and look after yourself. And it's whether it's a knee injury or a calf injury or whatever, it's the same message. Rehabilitate it properly, you'll get back and you'll enjoy the game quicker. Yeah,
definitely. I think it's very difficult at uni level, I've found.
But the other important thing is the peer support. Looking at people who are in their senior position, like yourself as captain, and just talking about your experiences and explaining to the rest of the players why it's important to look after themselves. And the younger players coming through will look at that, somebody who they can look up to and respect, saying, here's my honesty, here's why I wish I'd done things differently. I think, well, maybe I should do things differently as well. And I take it you're on the way back to playing, are you kind of
Even though I felt kind of physically in my body okay, it was more of a mental battle that I was actually struggling with, just because it then had been quite a few months out of contact, and contact was a big part of my game and probably one of my biggest strengths.
Yeah.
So kind of losing that to me was a big deal. And then watching people come towards me, running, tackling, I just had the mental block. And then discussing that with, other players in the team, they'd all said they'd been through similar things, and it takes time, and you'll build up your confidence again. But it was something that I hadn't really thought about because I've always just seen myself as quite invincible.
Yeah, and that, I mean, that's entirely natural in itself, because you know and love the game, but you've had a bad injury, and it's taken a long time to get back to it, and now you're hesitant in getting back into it. But look after yourself. You've looked after yourself. You're getting back. When you're ready to get back, and once you get back into games, once you get back into training again fully, I think you'll slip back into place and enjoy it just as much as you ever did. But with the benefit of being able to take that message to everybody else and say, look, just look after yourself. If in doubt, set them out. It's a fairly kind of simple kind of approach to it. And people kind of say, well, what do you mean by doubt? Well, as soon as you're asking a question, are they in the right place? I've had a bang in the head and I'm not feeling quite right. That's the doubt. Take time out. It's not going to, in the long term, it's a great benefit to you. The other thing, actually, just as a side issue on that, one of the things we know, so university, the most important thing at university is getting education. That's what it's there for. The sport and everything else is the bonus that goes alongside it. That sounds like a boring old person's thing to say, but that's true. The education is primarily there, and to do that, we need to be keeping up with the coursework, be keeping up with lectures, getting in our assignments, passing exams as we go through. When we know that when people have an acute concussion, all the brain circuitry that's required for really smart thinking is slowed down quite a lot. And so even from the point of view of your an important assignment coming up and you've had a bang in the head, you're risking your kind of university career, not just your rugby playing career, by hanging on in there, hoping that you'll be able to work through it. And you've had 6 months of not being able to play rugby. Imagine if it'd been several weeks, if not months, of your brain being in a fog and not working properly. That's going to slow your exam down. In the US, somebody in your position would have had adjustments to course assignments, so you'd have had longer to turn things in. You might even have had longer in exams. We're not quite there yet. In the past, we kind of focused a lot on the rest side of things, that people should rest and recover. And if you think about it, if you strain your hamstring, there's a few days of rest, but then you get back into the gym and start doing some light exercise and trying to give it back some strength. So we've tried to emphasize that okay, that rest thing we didn't mean for 6 months or 9 months or a year. We meant just for the first few days until you feel that you can get yourself up and going again, and then gently, as you would do with other injuries, introducing more stress in the brain. Now, the focus initially should be both physical but also mental well-being. So encouraging people to get out and walking, encouraging people to maybe start thinking about doing some light jogging, even if the headache gets a bit worse. Starting to do that, thinking about course and course adjustments, getting back into education again. And we make the priority, once you're ready to be back in education, once you've reached that hurdle, then you start thinking about what you can do in sport, and encouraging people to kind of get back into active rehabilitation. So really starting to work through the cycle of return to sport, return to learn, so that we can see people who are really needing that help. So again, by 21 days, most people should be ready to go back, but nobody can go back before 21 days. But most people should be ready by 21 days. So that's a good benchmark to set. By 28 days, though, if you're still struggling, if you're still stuck in the sofa, still not getting out of the house, still not getting back to coursework, then that's when you need to contact a doctor. And encouraging more people to go and see a doctor and less people to self-manage by just focusing on rest. So we're trying to kind of encourage people to get back into it.
Yeah, no, that's really good to hear, because I think because it was, in my brain and self-reporting, self-diagnosing, I was definitely like a bit of rest will help. Maybe I've changed into doing more running, like doing other forms of exercise, staying away from rugby or things that are contact related while I'm not quite ready for it, and doing a lot more walking, getting outside a lot, but haven't quite taken that step to get to a doctor's because you feel in yourself that you're managing it, and a bit of time will be fine. But I think it is good to get the message out there, as you were saying.
And it sounds like you are. I mean, there's all sorts of things clearly that happened over the last 6 months. It's not just been you out of rugby, but you've done all the right things. You've kept physically active. You've got the running. You've got the walking. You've kept up the education, obviously. So these things have all gone well. You've just not got back to this full contact match play. And that's the kind of final stage in recovery. That's this kind of the last bit that signs you off and go back and enjoy what you're doing. It's that can be the hardest, particularly if it's been a long time out, because you've got that worry, the anxiety, what it's going to be like to get back into it. Again, which is why we're trying to push people, not push them, but encourage them to think about getting back. By 28 days, if they're not ready, seek some assistance. And we're trying to get people recovered and back as quickly as possible to try and reduce the time that they're out of the sport that they love.
Next, I often have these conversations with my dad, and he's a rugby player, and he's grown up in a different kind of culture of rugby when it was very much, you get up and you keep going, and you don't come off the pitch. And I think that has definitely changed. And all the rugby I've played has been, take your time. If you're feeling injured, come off the pitch. You don't need to give your whole body for it. It's a team, it's a community. Everyone's there to support each other. But he's come from, I'd say, the older culture maybe. So it's interesting having conversations with him and how he views concussions. And
well, it is, and we're seeing generational change. So we were seeing, players now who are coming through the system, who've been through the youth system, and who are in the juniors in clubs and getting into professional rugby, who come through a culture where you're looking after yourself, physically probably better, training harder, but actually looking after themselves better. And so their awareness that concussions can be serious injuries and can actually lead to long symptoms, maybe even end careers, is something they're much more aware of. Us. I think there is a generational change, and substitutions, playing the whole team, everything is there to kind of encourage people to kind of make sure they get the best from the team performance rather than just relying on an individual. So, I mean, when I played, I'm not sure we had substitutes back then. I think that was a kind of an alien concept. Maybe just did it in the junior ranks to make sure everybody got a game, but it wasn't a kind of part of the formal game. And so you did feel like you were staying on. I broke bits of me and stayed on for one famous kickoff where the ball came straight to me, and in my classic fumbling way, I completely miscaught it and broke a finger. And then just carried on playing the rest of the game because we couldn't really, nobody else could sub in for me. And that's just, nobody does that anymore. That shouldn't do that anymore. Same with concussions.
So you mentioned before the Scottish Rugby are updating their concussion protocols, was something that the club used a lot and found very, very useful. So just wondering what the updates are and if there's anything.
So, this was something that we started maybe 10 years ago, where actually I had a student who was working with me. And one of the things we were interested in was what was the guidance for concussion management in various sports. And so he and I looked at, he looked at 50 UK sports, and the available information online, and where there was nothing, he went to them directly, email, calls, whatever he could get, and found that across those 50 UK sports, only 7 of them had any information on concussion for their athletes. And they were largely the rugby unions, a couple of football associations, and boxing. And when you looked at the detail, there was quite different information being given there. So football would say this is how you manage concussion and recognise it. Rugby would say this. It was slightly different. So it was quite confusing. So what made us think there was, if I was a parent or a player who was playing basketball and I got a bang in the head, what would I do about it? Or even if I was a rugby player and I got a bang in the head, and being a typical schoolboy or girl that might be playing football, for the school the next week, when I got another bang in the head, which management should I follow? So off the back of that, we thought the simple solution to this was to create just one set of guidance for all sport, because after all, the brain's the same no matter which game you're playing. So we sat down with the sports, with representatives from Scottish Government, with clinical colleagues, with people who'd been involved in concussion from their own personal experiences, and created just one set of guidance for concussion management. And that was launched about 8 years ago, covering all sport in Scotland, table tennis, taekwondo, boxing, rugby. I'd say rugby has really gone with that and run, and they now, you go to Murrayfield, you'll see if in doubt, sit them out across the whole hoardings. Glasgow and Edinburgh Rugby, when they're warming up, have it on their arm of their warm-up shirts. The international players have it on the arm of their shirts. The referees had it on their tops for a while at club level. So that's brilliant. But how we managed concussion 8 years ago isn't the same as we manage it now. So the new guidance, which is just about to come out, talks about thinking about active rehabilitation. So thinking about less focus on rest, more focus on you've had a couple of days to let things settle. Now let's start getting you back to activity again, because one, it encourages recovery, and two, for people who are physically active and want to keep moving, it gets them back into what they should be doing. So we know it's good for recovery. We know it's good, mentally as well, to get back into sport. We're also focusing on, every individual being treated the same. Differently. Every individual being treated as an individual. So you manage concussions individually, except for one thing where we're saying that nobody should be returning to sport, competitive contact sport, until 21 days at least after the injury, because we expect most people by then should be ready to come back, but enough people need that time that it's worth saying, and just as a blanket rule, let's take 21 days out. Then, we expect to see people get back. If you're not ready to go back, then we by 28 days, we want to you go and see a doctor and get somebody to have a look at you and see if they can help with that rehabilitation. But whichever way you're doing it, 21 days, 28 days, there's a process, a stepwise process for getting back and ready to play again. What they call the graduated return to sport, or actually we're talking about activity and sport, and what that involves is just taking it stepwise through. So beginning, for instance, with activity of going for some walks, going for some light jogging, and providing your symptoms don't get terribly much worse, just beginning to step that up steadily until you're ready after several days of gently increasing the exercise to be thinking about going back to doing some more, sports related drills. So in rugby, that might be getting out and doing some passing, but avoiding contact. And then by the time you get several days there, so 5 or 6 days into proper rehabilitation, you're beginning to think about putting some contact in there.
Yeah, that active rehabilitation is really interesting, and I think good one to hear, because I think for me, being a very active person, being outside a lot, playing sport a lot, that was definitely the hardest part. Not being able to do that, or not feeling like I should do that, and then the mental strain that was having on me, and feeling very low, feeling very anxious, and the effects on that, and how much was concussion and how much was the fact that I wasn't doing exercise, and something I was struggling with a lot.
I mean, there's a lot. I mean, the actual the physical and mental benefits of being active are remarkable. And I know myself that I cycle into work, and I run at the weekends and cycle at the weekends. And if I've had a busy week and I missed out on some of that, I start to feel low. So, and I'm just an amateur slogging away at it. But if you're playing, competitively, and it's part of what you like to do, and you're suddenly taken out of that environment, it really does compound the problems. So, you can do too much too soon. So we're not saying that you have a couple of days of rest and then you get straight back at it. What we're saying is that you take a bit of time out just for that brief period of rest, but then you begin to gently get yourself back into. The Scottish concussion guidance are available, on the internet. They should be distributed across all sports. Scottish Rugby are really good at distributing it. Scottish football have their way of distributing it. All the information's in there, and it should be an accessible document. But backed up by Rugby, Scottish Rugby have some really good online resource as well, just to talk people through it and take them through it in a kind of step-by-step manner. The kind of thing people should do at the start of a season. but also, when they or their teammate get a bang on the head, it's a good idea to pick it up again and see, well, what should we be doing now? And a lot of that work does show that female athletes in a sport where the rules are the same, male and female, the risk is higher in female athletes. We did some work looking at soccer, football in American high school athletes, and found that the risk was about double. And that doubling probably carries across most of sports where there's the rules are much the same. The symptom profile is different. Female athletes tend to report more symptoms, and their time to recover can be a bit longer as well. Which again, why we say each individual athlete should be treated individually. So we're not saying that female athletes shouldn't play sport. Will be expected of lots of symptoms, will take forever to recover. We're saying that treat athletes individually, and you'll recognise the individual female or male with injury. You'll rehabilitate female or male with injury, and the time taken may take a day or two longer for female athletes, but you're managing them individually, so it shouldn't really matter. The one thing I would say though, and this is interesting, this question for you, at university rugby level, when you're playing university representative rugby, what medical support is there pitch side for the women's team versus the men's team?
I'd say it's very similar level of support. Obviously, the men's club is operating with a lot more players, and then probably a bigger coaching staff because of that. But they then have 4 or 5 teams, whereas women's club is on 1 or 2 teams, but neither often have physios pitch side, and that is the same for any university club that I visited. Sometimes you might have students physios who are getting some experience, but often not a medical professional.
I mean, this is the worry that in grassroots sports, there's nobody there who's got the kind of medical professional. Again, the concussion guidance is designed to put it in the hands of anybody, parents, teachers, players, so they can understand what to do for first aid for brains effectively. But what we see and we're trying to address is that where resource is available, so there might be a physio or some doctor available, that generally what happens is they get sidelined to the male team, which might be fine, but actually the risk is highest in female. So maybe we should put at least as good resource in female teams as female matches as well. And the professional sports are beginning to pick up on that and beginning to address that now. So even rugby not so long ago, there wasn't nearly the medical support sidelines in senior rugby for females as there was male, but that's being addressed now.
It's been incredible to see how the women's game has grown, over the last 3-4 years even, since the World Cups and the Six Nations, and seeing how Scotland's grown and how that's kind of trickled down into grassroots and people picking up the sport. At uni, we've had probably double the amount of numbers that we've had a couple of years ago. So it's been really good to see, but making sure it is managed properly, as you've said, and make sure people can get those benefits out of it without having to suffer any consequences.
It's fantastic seeing the women's game develop the way it has developed. So I've got 2 girls who are 26, 24, and despite my best efforts, I couldn't get them to play around. We played a back garden, throw the ball around until they get bored, but I couldn't get them to pick it up. It's a great sport. I mean, I would say that I played it for all that time and continue to engage with it. But we can make it better, because what a lot of the research we've seen has been that footballers and rugby players in various measures are healthier individuals years after they played the game than they would be otherwise. So people who haven't played football and rugby at the higher levels we're looking at, and that's clearly a health benefit carried forward from just being a physically active individual. So blood pressure is lower, mental health's better. They don't drink so much, don't smoke so much. Do a bit more physical activity. But what we do see though, as you get further and further away from active playing the game, is that we see problems with lifelong brain health. So we see risks of dementia in later years, particularly at the elite level, and that's a bit of a pain, because it's preventable. Don't bang your head so much and deal with your injuries better. So that's the long term game here, is that we deal with the acute injury, get people participating in the game a bit more, so that all the benefits of playing sport are still there. Blood pressure, cancer, everything is still there, but the risk of dementia and other diseases is taken care of. that'd be the win-win.
You mentioned before that men and women have different symptoms potentially and longevity. I was just wondering what those symptoms might be that are different.
So the symptoms of concussion are just anything the brain does. The common ones are headache, unsteadiness, visual disturbance, things like that, fogginess. And what we tend to see is that when we look for symptom reporting, that the female athletes just tend to report more symptoms and often more severe symptoms. There are various reasons suggested for that. How can I put this? The colloquial reason, shall we say, the informal reason is that women just complain more, which is clearly ridiculous. But that's what some people say, is that women are more honest about the symptoms. That's the technical term, but that's what they're trying to say. So women will be more honest. They'll accept that they've been injured, and they'll hold their hand up to the injury because sport doesn't mean so much to them. This is what I hear. So there's no scientific validity in it. It's just the way that men and women report symptoms differently. I mean, there may be an element of that in that there's the bravado of the male athlete trying to hide the symptoms or being less open about the symptoms. But just in general health, women are much better at reporting things than men. But there's also some science that we need to think about as well. And this is the heavy science bit now. If I look at the fibers that run through your brain that connect your brain cells up, the axons as they call them, in men, they tend to be thicker with much more scaffolding, much more structure down the middle of them. In women, they tend to be thinner with much less scaffolding and much more fragile. So if we go into a lab and experimentally stretch male and female axons, male and female fibers, we find that the female ones show much more damage than the male ones. So there's a biological reason for that. The other biological reason is that most research goes on in men, whether that be in sport or whether it be in anything else, almost on the assumption that men and women are the same. But of course, women are quite different to men for all sorts of reasons. And one important reason is that men don't have a menstrual cycle, whereas women do. And the hormones going through that cycle period are all over the place. And particularly, one of those, progesterone, we know is important in some way for looking after brain and brain injury. And so second half of cycle, when progesterone is high and then injury can cause it to fall, we see that likelihood of concussion symptoms and concussion and recovery can be longer for female athletes than male. So there's the kind of informal, unacceptable suggestion that it's just because women like to report more symptoms, and then there's a science that says female brains are different to male, and female hormonal cycles quite different to male, and these all influence recovery and outcome.
Yeah, it's really interesting to hear. I never really considered there to be a gender difference. I think the only thing I ever thought about was potentially some men often have played longer. From my age category, men have often played longer because there was more youth options for them compared to women that have picked up the sport later. And me thinking maybe that's the reason why.
I mean, so we're looking at that, and so some of that might be the case that, as you said, you came to it late. I was speaking to, Anna Stotter, who played for Scotland and retired. I was speaking to her a few weeks ago, and she started when she was 24 and was playing international a year or two later. Female athletes can come to a later stage, which may be part of it. So we'll throw that into the mix as well, but it's not the whole reason for it, because we do know there's biology, we do know there's anatomy, we do know the other reasons that can blend into that mix as well. And actually, where people have said, well, another one that's suggested is that female necks are slimmer than males, which I don't, that may be true, but where we first began to worry about problems to do with head injury was in boxers, and boxers' necks are just like tree trunks, bolting their head onto them, and they still have problems. They still get knocked out. So having a strong neck isn't the answer to everything. And even when we've tried to look at the necks of female athletes versus male athletes and strengthening the necks of female athletes and seeing if that reduces, it doesn't make a difference. So I think the simple solutions of maybe if we strengthen necks, maybe if we get you into the game sooner, may make marginal but not great differences, because they're fighting against biology and anatomy, and that's much harder to tackle.
I'll stop doing my resistance training on my neck.
No, don't stop that. No, keep doing that. I'm not suggesting stop that, but it's not the simple solution that we're all looking for. in rugby, the research has shown tackle lower, good tackle technique. Being fit and ready to go on the park, looking after yourself. These are all important things for hopefully reducing the risk. There's some things you can't change dramatically. You are what you are. You can't change that. But we can put on the sideline, better support, or at least as good support for you as the men's team's getting, so that when one of you is injured, the support's there to get you that individual care, get that individual management to make sure you come back as soon as you're fit and ready.
Yeah, I think it was definitely something we struggled with when we didn't have coaches necessarily at games. You didn't have someone who was, more calm, more relaxed, and they could more objectively look at the pitch and identify the players who maybe had a head knock and were acting differently. It was often falling on the captain, which was sometimes myself, to identify those players while we're also looking after ourselves.
But we did something similar with the professional rugby a few years ago, where we just looked at concussion experiences and what their views were. And it was interesting because we found that split in the dressing room, that the younger players, whether it be head injuries or knee injuries, were fairly, blasé about it. I'll probably not say too much. I'll carry on. I don't want to end my career. I want to, keep playing as much as possible. But the older players, by and large, were much more conservative and cautious, and so they were worrying more about what the future might hold, and thinking more about looking after their health. And so we used that to do what you're doing, which was send the older players, back to just talk to the younger players about the importance of looking after themselves from their experience. And that's much better than somebody like me going and speaking to the players and saying, here's a good idea to look after yourself, because I'm a man in a white coat, who's a scientist. Nobody's interested. And even if I talk about my experiences of injury when I played rugby, again, that was so long ago, it's in black and white. Whereas if the players who are currently in the team, or who are seen as the icons of the game that they were playing not so long ago, are chatting to them about it, then it makes a big difference.
Yeah, I think there is a close friend of mine that has done, some more professional rugby. So I found it kind of very reassuring to know there's other people that have gone through these experiences, but then also speaking to other people who've gone through the same.
Try and stay active and participating in the game, not threatening the brain or brain health, but just looking after themselves better. Because it'd be such a shame for people to miss out. Where you've had a long time out, but you're getting back to it again, which is great. It'd be a shame, if over summer you'd thought, well, maybe I just won't go back at all now, because you'd be missing out. So better to get back at it and give it a go. And actually, this is my shelf of real science, which is where all the rugby autobiographies are. And actually, it's interesting looking at the history of these, where the first ones, Bernard Jackman, I think, was the first one I picked up, because somebody mentioned it, that there was a story about concussion in it, and he talked very openly about it. But it's interesting as you go through, right up to Joe Marler, actually, from a year or so ago, how the stories of concussion and how they view it as professionals now, and how they manage it and how they look after themselves have changed in that, 12 years or something, from Bernard Jackman through to Joe Marler. So we're seeing it quite a lot. Seeing it in these stories, maybe even just picking up one of these books is a good way for people to realise that actually looking after themselves can mean a longer career.
Yeah, no, I think because it's almost a kind of invisible injury. It's not like a break, an ACL or something. It's really visible. Everyone can see it and everyone can sympathise. It's self-reporting. It's how you're feeling in yourself, and other people can't necessarily identify that. So I think it's something I've struggled with, but reading these would be really helpful.
These are great. I mean, that's the reason they're there, because I often pick them off the shelf. Well, actually, I enjoy reading rugby books anyway. But I pick them off the shelf looking for good. Well, this is what Kevin Sinfield says about it. So let me just talk about it. And that, again, it's not me talking. It's I recognise these are sensible words when I see them. So it's good using those and using those as a kind of touch point for how best to look after things.
So obviously Scottish Rugby introduced the changes to the tackle height laws last season, and I was just wondering if there's been any research come out yet, how it's making a difference to concussion rates, or if it's too soon to tell yet?
Good question. So the reason that this was done, as you know, was because in rugby the tackle was seen to be the place where head injuries were really high likelihood, and in the breakdown of incidents where there was head injury, it was found that the sort of two upright players, going at each other, surprise surprise, were banging heads or banging shoulders to heads or doing something that caused most injury. I didn't mean that you didn't get an injury by tackling lower. It's just that the risk was highest. You're more likely to get an injury from those upright tackles. And so a few seasons ago, there were a couple of trials in South Africa and France, I think, that looked at what would happen if you lowered the tackle height. Did it make a difference? And the result was actually quite positively yes. That looked like it produced a reduction in risk of concussion. And so the plan is then to kind of roll that across the game, because it's obviously a benefit. Rugby has to do something about concussion because it's a phenomenal problem at professional level. It's a sport on its own in terms of risk of head injury. So so the plan is to roll that out as a measure across the game. The problem is it was kind of badly handled, and rugby being a global sport, that the Northern Hemisphere season is a different season to the Southern Hemisphere season. So introducing a change to the rules of the game is going to be halfway through somebody's season. So if you do it, at the end of Northern Hemisphere season, it's halfway through Southern Hemisphere season, and then suddenly they've all got to change halfway through season. So that went wrong to begin with, where they attempted something and it went badly wrong at English Premiership level, because suddenly they were saying, all of a sudden you've all got to tackle low, and it caused all sorts of mayhem and issues. So it's been introduced at grassroots and working up to senior level, which is much more sensible. And I think it's been managed okay. I mean, I know there's a lot of kickback that this is changing the game of rugby, and it's gone soft, and nobody's going to tell me how to tackle. This kind of stuff's going on. Well, I hear it. But the reality is it's happening. It's not going to change, and it's for the better of the game. And it may be awkward to begin with as people learn how to tackle, because when I played rugby, we tackled low. The target area was the waist and down. This, tackling upright, tackling the ball, is a kind of reasonably modern invention. So we're just trying to encourage people to get back to where the game might have been. Aim low, safer for you. And actually, I think the game's going to be better too, because if it does mean that there's a bit more ball in playtime because people are managing to get the offload, great. Yeah, quicker, faster rugby. And I'm now a spectator. I'm an armchair expert, and I sit in Scotland and instruct the players from my seat in the stand as to how they could be playing the game better. But one thing I would like to see is the ball moving around more, less, and even just less injury. So how much time do we spend while somebody's patched together, and the PA system's trying to get us all singing a song that we're not interested in? When they could be moving on and playing the game. So if we can do anything to reduce risk of injury, it's got to be good.
No, I think from my side, the changes of tackle height rules weren't an issue. I was always taught tackle low, and I'm only 5'2", so it was never an issue. But I know some of my taller teammates, they had to change their technique a bit and they had to move. But after you've had your first warning from the ref, you learn, and that was it.
Yeah, and that pushback of there was a big fury just recently because there were so many cards over a weekend of rugby, and coaches saying they'll have to change because it can't go on like this. It's, well, no, the game won't have to change. You'll have to change. You'll have to go into the dressing room and say to the folk who are gathering up the cards, you've been told. Do we have to go through this again? Get lower. So it's going to have to change. I mean, the worst case scenario is that nothing changes, and slowly, parents start to think that this rugby is not a game for the kids. School start to think this isn't a game for kids, and it becomes something that isn't encouraged. Is there a university boxing club? Yeah. There's no reason why these sports can't go on, because with the discipline, with the care, with the management, and with all the benefits they can bring, the risks can be managed. But the problem, I think, my fear is that if we don't look after this properly, we're going to end up with rugby being, you know, a sort of a niche sport that only, you know, crazy people would consider playing because of the risks. Whereas if we adapt it slightly, it's going to be just as much fun for hopefully longer.